Hey everyone, I'm going to look over a few more hands today from the World Series of Poker 1500 Mixed Omaha tournament, where I made a semi-deep run, fizzling out in 28th place. These hands all came from late day 2, early day 3, these two hands. So deep inside the money, but very little ICM pressure and more or less just trying to maneuver our stack and build up towards the final table. But what often happens in the later stages of these big bet Omaha events, or really any mixed game tournament, is a lot more shallow stack situations where a lot of the game kind of boils down to estimating my equity in a situation where there's going to be an all-in and call. And so that's what both of these hands are looking at today. And the first one here was me raising pre with a decent looking combo of ace deuce 3, 8, 10 in big O, and the big blind defending on a short stack, and then leading into me for pot on king 5 deuce with 2 diamonds and a spade. Me having backdoor nut spades, nut low draw, pair of twos. And this is the stage of the tournament where people are playing quite carefully. So I understood that this pot size bet represented, what the big blind felt was a strong hand. They're not just kind of getting in there light here. When I did the math at the table, I don't have it all written down, but when I did the math at the table, I calculated that I needed 40% hot and cold equity to put the rest in. So this means that he had some money behind, because if it was just a pot size bet all in, I'd only need 33%. But this means that he had a little bit behind. But obviously, if I call on the flop here with the nut low draw and brick on the turn, and he only has a little bit left, I'm going to have to put it in on all turns anyway. So it's good in these sort of circumstances to calculate your effective odds, which means the total amount that you're going to have to put in, including what he has behind. So anyway, I knew at the table that I needed 40% against his range. So the first place we can start to kind of analyze this hand is just to look at how was I doing against his actual hand. If he had turned his hand face up, would I have made the same play? I did stick it in. And in this case, if I saw his hand, I would actually think maybe not, right? I mean, I'm doing very poorly against king 5 and the nut flush draw and the second nut low draw. I mean, if a 3 comes, I'm basically dead, and I don't have a lot of ways to win the high here. But I got a pleasant surprise when I looked at the exact hand here, which is that even against this very strong looking hand, I do have 40% equity here. So that made me feel pretty good about my play, because if I have 40% against what looks like a very strong looking hand here, then he would have to have an absolute monster for me to not have it. And we can look at that a little bit here just to sort of hone our estimations of equities in Big O, which to be honest is not my strong suit. So I'm just happy to see that I didn't make a big blunder here. But if we look at couple different types of hands that he could hold here, so I think an obvious type of hand that he might be able to hold here would be like something like Ace 3-4, and I'll probably put in, maybe top 50% of hands and not aces, because I think that is kind of like he's very unlikely to have ace 3 4 just flat pre in the situation. And against this hand, I still think I'm going to have around 40%, to be honest, but I'm not sure. If you guys have any guesses, feel free to let me know before I click the magic button here, but I'm pretty interested in this one. And we can see that's actually a little worse for me here. Ace 3 4, so him having the same nut low draw as me, plus the open ender, and then obviously he could have a bunch of side cards that can also just be a stronger pair or anything like that. So, but nevertheless, I mean, even still, even against a very strong hand like that, I have 37% equity. Another type of hand that villain could hold here would probably be some sort of nut flush draw combo that is going to have some other things with it, but it's a little unclear what, right? So if we just look at, let's say, top 20% of hands, not aces, and including two diamonds. Well, let's include ace of diamonds and another diamond to give him the nut flush draw. I think I'm going to be doing fine against this, because he's going to have a lot of weaker ones, but nevertheless, it would also probably be right for villain to start getting aggressive here. I mean, if I have a naked ace-deuce combo, he is going to be able to put some pressure on a lot of my hands, and people might mistakenly overfold their equity in this spot. So against that kind of wideish range here, okay, so even still, it's basically about 40%. Interesting enough, it doesn't seem like I can really find any hands that make sense I'm doing better than 40% against. I suppose we could look at a hand like top set, like naked kings, and I'm probably going to be doing about the same against that. doing a little better now. So, yeah, I think this is kind of interesting. It kind of seems like I was getting kind of a break-even price here against like a lot of his range. Like having looked at this, knowing I needed 40% equity, and basically against any sort of a reasonable hand that we're assigning villain, I have somewhere between 37 and 43. It actually makes me think that like my call was fine, or my jam in this case was fine, but that it is relatively close because this is the kind of situation where maybe I would try to preserve some chips for, let's say, quote unquote, a better spot. Because if I need 40% and I'm getting about exactly, I have about exactly 40%, then this is basically a break-even call. So I'm increasing my volatility significantly by putting the money in here. So seeing that I really haven't found a lot of hands that I have more than 43% against does make me think that it was kind of a zero EV spot, but these things can be very, very difficult to quantify at the table when you're kind of making an estimation off the cuff. And I will say that my experience in general in mixed game tournaments is that people just tend to overfold these spots way too much. So, I don't want to err on that side when I don't have a good understanding of the equity of the situation. Yeah, so that's all I see about this hand. And then one other hand here, this was actually in some ways an easier hand to play. This was a 3-bet pot where I opened with ace 3 4 9 10 and got 3-bet and called. And then the flop came ace jack deuce with 2 clubs and a diamond. So a pretty big flop for my hand. I mean, a very big flop for my hand here. I flopped the nut low draw with an ace. The ace is kind of whatever here. Obviously, villain's going to have a better ace than my hand a lot. And I had clubs. So not super good clubs, but 9-3 of clubs. Looking like a very good hand here. And we were relatively shallow at this point, so it was a no-brainer to get all the money in here. And then I was very disappointed to see the hand that my opponent ended up turning over, which is ace 3 6 jack jack for a set and a weaker low draw than mine, but still a low draw that could easily counterfeit me. And I think this is just a cold deck for both players in the 3-bet pot. There was obviously no way that either of us would not want to put all of our money in here on this flop. But I was curious to imagine who is actually the favorite here on the flop. And that's why I wrote this hand down, because more out of curiosity. I mean, villain has a very strong made hand with a set, as well as some low cards and some counterfeit potential for my low draw. I have the nut low draw and the clubs, and I thought it was pretty close in game. Any guesses from you guys? I'm going to go ahead and push it, and we'll take a look here together. I'm a small favorite, so very, very standard kind of a flip situation for both of us. But interesting to see that even against this hand as strong as a set here, with my nut low draw and my bad clubs here, I am a small favorite. And so we can again tinker around with the ranges here and think about some other hands that villain might have here. I think an obvious likely hand for him to hold here is just the case 2 aces. I felt like in game that was what I was most likely going to see, and I think I'm going to be about the same against this. It doesn't seem like aces versus jacks really matters all that much here. We see I'm slightly worse because I'm giving him all side cards, so now there's some chance that he can have aces with better clubs, or aces with the same low as me, things like that. I also can't run off a higher boat, right? Like against jacks, I could run off ace X, and make a higher boat, but against aces I can't. So that's kind of interesting to see. But nevertheless, I'm still thrilled to put my money, not thrilled, but fine to put my money in here against this. And obviously, in a 3-bet pot, I'm going to be getting in with less than 50% equity, like a lot of the time with so much money in the middle. That's just completely fine too. But always interesting to see. Another hand that we might find here is something like, I don't know, ace deuce with a similar low card. So ace deuce 3 4. And that's going to include all aces, as well as like ace deuce 3 4 5, things like that. I think against this hand, again, I'm going to be doing about the same. I think it's going to just be kind of 50-50 either way. And I'm doing slightly better against this, but again, I mean, 53%. These are all just very flippy, standard cold deck situations in Omaha. So really nothing too interesting about this one, other than I was curious to see if I'm a favorite against the set and the low draw on these boards. To not matter so much what the results were, but I believe I chopped in both hands. So neither of these hands was really the end of my Big O, my Mixed Omaha run. It did turn out later on in the tournament that I just sort of fizzled out in spots where I was kind of whiffing on boards. And I don't have any more interesting hands written down from this tournament other than slowly bleeding down and running out of chips in 28th place. A fun run, but not really as close as you want, since all the big money is obviously at the final table. But, it was still another successful tournament for me early on in the World Series of Poker this summer, and getting to look up a bunch of spots in Big O, which is one of my weaker games, and kind of just feel like I was dialed into these equity estimations at the table. That's a good thing to analyze here in ProPokerTools Odds Oracle, and I'm happy I looked up these hands. So let me know what questions you have and what this makes you think about. And if you have any suggestions or other ideas for things I could look at in Big O, I'm happy to do that. And I'll see you guys in the comments. Talk to you soon.